Welcome to the License to Lead podcast. I'm Patty Fay. This podcast is for physicians or anyone who thinks healthcare needs a transformation led by physicians. License to Lead means that physicians are charged with and must be in charge of guiding the vision and the culture of healthcare systems. Hi, welcome everyone. Today, I hope to get to the bottom of something that has puzzled me for years. And my guest this week, Dr. Christopher Obetz, an emergency room physician, is perfectly situated to resolve the mystery. Dr. Obetz, who goes by the first name Topher, is the president and CEO of Emergency Care Consultants, or ECC. ECC is an organization that provides emergency care in hospitals based out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So what's the mystery, you ask? Well, a friend of mine is an emergency room doctor who spent her entire career up in Minnesota with ECC, working at their hub hospital, Abbott Northwestern. My friend has loved her career and colleagues and staff. She's loved her schedule. And honestly, I've never heard her complain about the electronic medical record, the support staff, the PPE, the leadership, or anything else. So isn't that a mystery? I mean, this is emergency medicine where burnout was born. So my hope is that Dr. Obetz, who has been the leader of ECC for 10 years, will shed some light on this. What's responsible for an emergency medicine culture with satisfied physicians and staff, virtually no physician turnover, remarkable growth, and a great reputation? And on a more sober note, now that we're in year 2 of the COVID pandemic, ECC is threatened by some big challenges. So I hope to find out how Dr. Obetz and his partners are sizing up the future. Welcome, Topher. Thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Patty. Very happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I also appreciate the kind words about our organization, and we'll try to repeat some of the words you have.
Well, you heard my lead in talking about the mystery of your organizational culture, and I wonder, would it work if we started out by talking about what ECC is and how it was born?
ECC, Emergency Care Consultants, we were created in 1992, and we were formed by a group of 8 or 10 physicians who were, at that time, they were employees of the hospital. And they had the vision of creating an independent, democratic, physician-owned, physician-led staffing group. And they convinced the hospital and actually had strong support from the hospital to create this new group. None of them had experience, none of them had know-how, but they had ideas and a vision for what they wanted to accomplish. And it was really predicated upon a number of core principles. Number one is they wanted to be truly democratic, in which all physicians or all owners of the group would have an equal voice. They wanted to be self-led, physician-led, but also not just by a figurehead, not by president or medical director, but they really wanted to have a very strong level of engagement amongst those partners. So while they did have formal positions that carried certain responsibilities, most of the hard work was done at their monthly business meetings, where they would collectively discuss and vote upon a wide variety of things, from the most mundane things like what do we do with EKGs when they're handed to us by an EMT, to much more higher level and much more important decisions. That was easy to do when they had 8 physicians in the group, and it was kind of a lower volume, smaller emergency department. But throughout the 90s and since then, emergency medicine volumes, the status of emergency medicine within hospitals in the medical world has really risen. And our group along the same lines has really grown significantly in that time.
Do you have an idea what led the docs to want to break away from being employed physicians? How were they doing?
I think they were tapping into the age-old conflict that many physicians face, which is decision-making capacity. Do they have boots on the ground? Their emergency departments are very, very complex operational environments. And I think they really felt that they had the best capacity to make the decisions about how to operate within that environment. And they had a hospital that was willing to give them a shot. They felt that they were going to yield better results if they were the ones calling the shots, making decisions. And they were going to also have better satisfaction amongst their providers if they had that level of engagement. Imagine a physician, what are dissatisfiers for physicians? Well, there are a lot of them, but one is when you face a problem day in and day out and it never gets resolved, and you don't have the capacity to contribute to that solution. What we found, and I think a lot of other physicians and providers have found, that if they can contribute to those solutions, if they're giving the capacity to seek the resolution and seek the solutions, it's a big satisfier.
Yeah, like they can make the decision, they understand what the decision should be, and they have the autonomy to make it happen, it sounds like.
That's right. Yeah. And you can't do that in a vacuum. It's physicians also need to understand that their decisions, they're not the only players. Emergency medicine is a team sport. There are nurses, there are patients, there are EMTs, there are hospitalists, there are specialists, there are paramedics, there are hospital administrators. You can't be myopic in your views. You need to seek solutions that work for the entire ecosystem and to have a more sophisticated understanding of the repercussions of their decisions and looking for solutions that are really going to be sustainable and supported by a wide array of players.
And it sounds like the founders then of ECC absolutely had this strength, I guess, of having that big strategic picture and thinking about how to get along with all the various stakeholders in the organization.
Yeah. And I don't know if they understood it. They had a tremendous amount of wisdom. And that has carried us. So as our organization has evolved, it's grown tremendously in the past 25, 30 years. But we've still been able to use those very, very basic and core principles as our guideposts as we are 25 times larger than we were back then. Well, not that big, but significantly larger than we were back then, but still able to utilize those same principles. And they continue to serve us extremely well. So those principles have allowed us to be really modular in our growth and continue to really thrive and to kind of yield some of the same benefits that they yielded back in 1992.
Great. Well, maybe before we dive more specifically into some of the nuts and bolts, I guess, of what makes it work, or maybe we'll get there with this question, but could you talk about your history with ECC as you came on board and then what's happened since you've been with them?
Sure. So I joined the group and I came out of residency in 2003, and I had a connection with the hospital. I always admired the hospital, and I took a job there. And one of the things that I was really attracted by was the opportunity to really have a voice. And they welcomed me very magnanimous and gracious as I entered. And within a year, they were already giving me projects, committee opportunities, leadership opportunities.
So you started, I think you said in 2003, and then at some point you became the leader of the organization. Can you talk more about that and kind of what changed over the past decade or so that you've been in that position?
Yeah. So my predecessor as president of the group, he'd been the medical director and the president, and then he became the chief of staff of our hospital. And so he had a new leadership opportunity. And so they're in search of somebody to replace him. And I was given the opportunity to take on that role about 10 years ago. Right about that time, our group was coming to the realization that it would be challenging for us to thrive as a boutique organization. I mean, we were pretty small at that time. We only had maybe 20 docs at the time. We were just staffing one emergency department. And we felt that it was important for us to start to grow. The hospital that we work at is part of the Allina healthcare system in the Twin Cities. It's a very large system. They've got about 12 hospitals, give or take. And we had developed a pretty good reputation within Allina. And we had developed that reputation based upon a couple core principles of our group. Number one, we looked at the healthcare systems as a partner rather than an opposing force. We felt that our best opportunity to improve care, to improve operations, and to thrive was if we really supported a symbiotic relationship with healthcare leaders within the system. And they recognized that. And so when we approached them and asking for growth opportunities, they did have some hospitals that were having some struggles. And we were initially invited into one of the larger hospitals as a consultant. And then later we're given the contract for that hospital. And since that time, we've continued that cycle where we do best when we look at the hospitals that have a need. Traditionally, it's been for ER doctors, there's a lot of different employment models, but one of the more common ones is being an employee of the hospital. And that model hasn't always been terribly successful in this community. And we've been able to demonstrate some better performance when our group has come in. And so that's really been our growth model. And so when a hospital approaches us and they say, boy, we're struggling with engagement or retention, even with financial performance, we've been able to, tell a story about how we feel that we can really improve across all those parameters and others as well. Ultimately, our goal is not to turn into a mega group. There's probably a certain size beyond which, there's a tipping point at which time we become too corporate and too centralized and kind of lose our luster. Right now, we're a medium-sized organization. We have 3 major divisions. We staff 10 hospitals, and we're still able to continue our very, very democratic process and continue to really stick to the same principles that we started off with in 1993.
You talked about going into these emergency departments where they're not performing that well or have low engagement or high turnover. And so are you acquiring these physicians that are employed there? And then what happens? Do they continue to be disengaged, or how does all that play out?
Yeah, great question. So we have numerous audiences when we get a new contract. We have to convince the hospital or the healthcare system that we're the right partner for them. But usually they have a full staff of providers, and we have to also convince them that ECC is a good commitment. We certainly couldn't be successful if none of them wanted to join us. We'd be sorely understaffed and wouldn't be able to staff the joint. So we really need to, when we enter into a new environment, we really need to tell our story about where we come from and what we aspire to. And we've been really successful in getting these docs to take a chance with us. And they join us. There's a little bit of a transition period where they're now employees of ECC and learning the ways and means of our organization, and most importantly, learning the culture. But very quickly, we set about recreating that democracy that we did for the first time back in 1993. So we started having monthly business meetings where all these doctors who are not accustomed to meeting and making decisions, because it was always handed off to a medical director or a series of committees in the hospital, suddenly now we bring them into the meetings and we pay them to attend the meetings and we obligate them to go to the meetings. It's amazing how quickly they grab the ring, really see the light and take on ownership and take on responsibility. And very quickly, they recognize that what I've been telling you earlier, that doctors are more satisfied when they call the shots, when they have a say, when they're heard, and when they have problem-solving capacity.
I'm curious what it looks like when you go in and meet with a group of physicians who are employed and you need to size them up and they need to size you up. What does that conversation look like? What sorts of things do you present to them in this pitch?
Yeah, it can be wild. It may not be unlike this conversation. Well, first of all, we try not to talk too much. We want to listen and hear what their experience has been and what their aspirations are. But it's really imperative that they learn about our organization. I've always been skeptical of the Lee Iacocca's of the world who come in with a strong fist and tell you that this is the way it's going to be done. I think a little bit more humility goes a long way, and having a leader who can listen and, I focus on trying to gain their trust. And I believe in dialogue. I mean, we talk and we try to listen and work through their concerns and work through those issues that they may have. And really kind of that slow build of the trust. We meet many times before we actually take over. And sometimes we also look at opportunities and we go in there thinking this might be a great opportunity. And once or twice we've decided, hey, this might not be a good fit. Maybe this organization might be a culture clash, or maybe what they're looking for is not what we're looking for. And so we've always had the capacity to not overcommit ourselves when the time is right.
You can back away. So you can back away if it doesn't seem like it's going to be a fit. And
yeah, you always need a ripcord, right?
What would be a typical question to get from a skeptical bunch of docs that you're in there trying to convince them that ECC is a great way to go for them? And if they're skeptical, what do they say?
Well, a lot of the skepticism is based upon how we resolve kind of routine matters. And so when you really boil it down, some of the things that really matter to ER doctors are schedule and money, because we have to work days, evenings, nights, weekends, holidays. Knowing just the basics of the schedule goes a long way. Most larger healthcare organizations have fairly rigid schedules. And although this might sound a little mundane, it's actually really important to docs. So Patty, if you wanted to come join our group and work for us, we would say, all right, we have 8-hour shifts and, they can be days, evenings, nights, holidays, weekends. What is your nirvana? What's your shift nirvana? And what that means is, how much do you want to work? And every doc in our organization has an ideal number of shifts that they want to work. So rather than saying you're 1.0 FTE and you're expected to work 1,640 hours per year or whatever it is, every single person in our organization tells us how much they want to be working. Now, they understand that the amount they work is closely related to how much money they're making, but they have the freedom to make those decisions. And that's dynamic throughout their career. So we all have chapters in our life. You might have a period of your life where you want to be working all the time. And then suddenly you have 3 kids and you really need to dial things back. And then now the couple of years later, the kids are off to college and you want to work more. You are in the driver's seat and you get to make those changes depending on your needs at that particular station in life. So that's a really basic thing that we do, but it's meaningful to people because we know that everybody is different from one another. Everyone has different needs. Everyone has different financial needs. And when you're at work, it's so important to make sure that you're there on good terms with yourself, right?
Wow.
One of the big drivers of burnout is being overworked, of course. And emergency medicine is one of the most burnout heavy environments that there is, not even in medicine, across the entire landscape. And we really feel that working less and having ownership over your schedule and flexibility and outlets, really, that's another major contributor to wellness for our group.
I mean, there must be a significant return on this investment because that's a big hassle. Well, I know that in a lot of organizations, people are not allowed to go less than 1.0, much less entertain a variety of schedules. So that's a big investment. That's work to get that figured out, and it must be worth it. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our accountants, our payroll specialists, they hate me because it's putting together a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle instead of a 100-piece jigsaw puzzle. I mean, it really, really takes an incredible amount of back-end administrative support to be able to support this type of scheme. But it's worth it. It's really central to our vision of success. Our doctors, and this all comes down, Patty, to patient care. So we feel that our doctors are going to provide better care for their patients when they're arriving well rested, when they're not working 6 days in a row and are feeling crispy. We want them to show up energized and eager to see those patients. We also do some other things like we staff heavier than most emergency departments so that our providers see fewer patients per hour than you would in most places. So that means they have more time at the bedside with patients. They're getting stretched in fewer directions. This results in longevity. It results in excellent retention. And it also allows people to continue to have energy to put into other things that we think are meaningful, such as contributing to leadership in our group. But also, as I was mentioning earlier, we really put a premium on getting involved in our relationships with the hospital. So many of our providers sit on committees. Many of our providers have been chiefs of staff of our hospitals. And that all goes back to our, really assists ECC in demonstrating value to those healthcare systems. So it really deepens our roots and really helps our relationships with the hospitals. And really, we hope to be irreplaceable and the provider of choice for these hospital systems. So all of this really ultimately goes back to feed that aspiration.
And these other assignments are paid for if they're attending meetings or taking on a task force or some other initiative, they're getting paid for that.
Yeah, it's important to pay. If you're asking somebody to come into work, you got to pay. And that goes for leadership too. You have to pay people to lead. And, we've been fortunate. The finances generally have been very supportive of that. But one of the struggles is as we face all the financial repercussions of the pandemic, and we've had a hospital close recently, all of that calls that into question. So that's one of our big challenges we face right now, which is, do we keep our foot on the gas pedal? And do we continue to push forward with our ideals, even though they're relatively more expensive when times aren't good? Or do we give up on those values and do we promote austerity measures? And if so, how will that harm the culture? How will that harm the wellness of our organization? So that's one of our big struggles that we face right now.
Wow. And how are you landing on these decisions? Where are you coming down on the decision, for instance, around staffing and
Yeah. So just as a quick backdrop, the pandemic has affected every single person in this country and just about everybody on this planet. And so we know it's not just affecting our group, but the way it has affected emergency medicine in our group is that emergency department volumes have really tanked since the pandemic. Patients are scared to go to the ER. And so in the past year, we've seen volumes go down by 20 to 30%, depending on our hospitals. And one of our major struggles has been, do we keep our staff in its current state, or do we lay people off, or do we stop hiring? And then to make matters worse, at the end of this past year, at the end of 2020, one of our hospitals closed. And that really compounded our staffing such that now we're really, really overstaffed. And so we're having to make some really tough decisions. Do you spread that overstaffing burden evenly amongst all providers? Do you do it just upon the owners? Do we lay people off? What sorts of commitments have we made to our employees? We asked them to take a chance on us. We're trying to sell ourselves to these great docs coming out of residency and moving here from other places. And they made a commitment to us and we made a commitment to them. And so we're doing everything we can to keep full staff and just kind of work our way step by step through the problem. It's a challenge and we're in the midst of the problem right now.
Right.
And we don't know how the end is going to look, but we're really trying to adhere to our principles and once again, use them as guideposts as we make these tough decisions.
And I want to come back to really specifically come back to the principles and values that you've talked about. And maybe we could get more specific about that. But before I go there, I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about all the involvement and engagement of your physicians. What does that actually look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when we have our monthly meeting at one of our hospitals where all the docs are there, you can go around the room. Well, we're no longer in a room. You can go around the Zoom screen and with very few exceptions, you could point to every single person and say, this person is involved in this committee. This person, everybody has a role, big or small, large or small. There are a few people who all they want to do is just work shifts, and that's okay. But that's a very small minority. We have a number of people who have, larger medical director roles or associate medical director roles, big formal roles that take up a significant percentage of their professional life. But we have tons and tons of other opportunities. It could be sitting on a hospital committee. It could be helping spearhead some innovative new directions that we're going, new projects or new opportunities. Somebody could be on our diversity committee. We have educators, and we really like to promote kind of that creative side of our lives or that kind of that non-clinical side, or we really want people to have, follow their passion. So if someone comes forth, they may have something that's completely novel to us and you may not even think of it as a good fit for emergency medicine, but they have a passion for it. Oftentimes we'll even pursue that. We've had docs who got involved in, medical missions in Haiti, and they started bringing pharmacists and doctors and then starting doing fundraisers to bring ultrasound machines there and such. I mean, the list goes on. There's quite a bit of breadth of all the different ways people have gotten involved, but it's really exciting. And this goes all the way back to when we're recruiting. So much of our emphasis is, we know they're good providers. They've gone through lots and lots of filters already, and they're coming out of, top emergency medicine residency programs. Really, we focus on people who are going to have that energy to look for creative outlets and bring innovative ideas to our organization. And we want that both internally within our organization, but we also want people to have breadth in their lives outside of work. Once again, we think that people who work less and spend more time pursuing their other passions are going to perform better when they're actually at work.
We really should look at those people as athletes. Athletes will sprint and rest. And that sounds like what you're describing. You're describing investing in the physical and mental health of these athletes that are taking care of people in your emergency rooms.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Wellness was not really a part of all of our vernacular. We started using that word a little bit more recently, but those ideas and concepts, those are things that my predecessors in the group always espoused. I think pursuing that in any way you can is almost always the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, it strikes me that it's so foundational, though. It's so foundational that people are able to get enough rest, get enough sleep, have the downtime so that they can recuperate and recover. That has to be the foundation. And if that's not there, no amount of yoga and meditation, which I think we both totally promote, but no amount of that or incense or meetings about wellness, none of that is going to make a difference if people have ungodly, harrowing schedules and they're aching to spend time with their family.
Yeah.
It seems so critical. I don't know if you have more to say about that or if you've sized that up differently.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, the way I look at it, when we do our reviews, one of the things we tend to bring up every time is, tell me about your clinical schedule. And oftentimes it goes like this: I'm worried that you're working too much. Can we help you work less? Wow. And we promote working less. And we talk about this being a marathon. It's not a sprint. People have different gears at different times in their lives. People coming out of residency sometimes are they are fast and they love to work. And that works great. I love working alongside somebody like that because it fits my gear. When mm-hmm. they're in fifth gear and my natural gear, it used to be fifth gear. Now I live in second gear.
What does second gear look like, Topher?
lots of sleep, lots of wellness, and showing up for work energized when you're ready to go.
Does it look different at work?
Yeah, it does. It does. When I was a younger physician, I used to look at high quality care differently than when I measured it differently than what I do now. It used to be more about quantity and getting people in the emergency department and taking care of quickly and get them out fast, or in the right people's hands quickly. And that's still important. But actually, my personal philosophy about good care, I think as a doctor, is an educator. And so when I sit with a patient, they're going to be in the ER for a couple hours. I've never met them before. So the first goal is to forge a trusting relationship with the patient and their family, if they're there. That's goal number one. Number two is to listen, make sure that they feel heard and reassured. And third is to educate them so that when they leave the ER, whether they're going home or the cath lab or the OR or the floor, they understand what's happening. And all of this takes time. So I may no longer be the fastest doctor, but I feel like I'm providing much better care than I ever did before.
This is kind of the opposite of what is causing a lot of burnout, which is just getting buried with rapid fire patients zooming down the assembly line and really feeling some of that moral injury from not connecting with patients and knowing that you're not really doing the best job. And I imagine you agree with that, but can you explain, where does the money come from? How does this pan out financially? Why does it work, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Overall, the finances of emergency medicine are healthy for a private group. The basic business model is that we contract with the insurance companies for rates for professional fees. And oftentimes we try to integrate value measurements and performance measurements to help boost that. And so that all parties feel good about that, including their customers, our patients, knowing that quality is a component of compensation for us. So that's number one. But we've always had healthy relationships with those insurance companies. So the business model, our compensation is healthy. But also, I think we have to remind ourselves that physicians, it is a lucrative career, and some people go in it for the money. But also a pretty significant component of going into medicine is, having meaning and providing value to your community and your patients. And I think our doctors, at least in our group, and this kind of goes back to who we look for to join our group, we look for people who have that sense of altruism and curiosity and devotion to patients, as well as a nice balance with productivity and efficiency and things like that. There's a principle, you probably know the name of the principle. It has a name and I don't remember the name, but it states that after an individual or professional meets a certain income level, certain cohort of people in our society are no longer interested in making more money. They've reached that threshold that they need. And most of their time and energy really shifts towards improving the quality of their trade. And I see that in emergency medicine. I see that in our group. All of our providers have gotten to this threshold, a minimum financial threshold that works well for them. And so you almost start taking that out of the equation once that is attained and maintained. And we don't talk openly about it, but that's my perception of where most people's heads are at within our group. Now, it doesn't mean, now I will say, we're worried about our volumes. We're worried about the future. So that's easy to say when times are good. It's a whole different matter when times aren't good. And times aren't good right now.
I would suspect that the fact that you have no physician turnover, and the lack of physician turnover generally doesn't have a line item anyplace. There's nobody that really looks at that or calculates the kind of the return on investment, I guess, of a fantastic organizational culture where there's no turnover and there's high engagement. And I imagine that that's, from what you're saying, that's a huge part of what's going on. And I don't know the name of that concept either, but I certainly have read the same thing, that once you reach a certain income level, it doesn't provide any more happiness or satisfaction. I think sometimes demanding more money or wanting more money is a proxy for happiness with people that are very dissatisfied with their careers. They might see making some demands for a certain level of income or seeking to get a certain level of income as kind of making up for the fact that life at work sucks. And
I think you're exactly right.
And you're taking all of that out of the equation. Like you said, I mean, they've got good incomes and they've got, it sounds like, great work lives. Topher, you've mentioned so many times the values of the organization and some core principles and I wonder if you could talk through a little bit about the values specifically and how they show up. How are they made visible, I guess, through your work?
Yeah. Well, our mission statement is to provide outstanding care to any patient at any time. And within our values, that's also essentially our first value, which is to provide outstanding emergency care. So anytime we have to make a decision about something, and we make decisions every day, we agree that no decision can harm patient care, nor will we allow any decision to detract from patient care. So once you understand that, and once everybody agrees that, then that's easy. It kind of takes the pressure off because we know it wipes out a whole bunch of options in terms of what we have in front of us when we have to make a decision. And it helps all of us keep our eyes on really what's most important, which is patient care. And that's inarguable. By having that as our first value that we have, it really just kind of sets the stage for where our priorities are.
Right.
The next one that I think is really important to us is we know that our survival is predicated upon strong relationships with the hospitals and the healthcare systems. I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but really, we truly believe that even though those relationships can be challenged at times and can be difficult, we really feel that we're going to be most successful if we link arms with the healthcare systems and create a symbiotic relationship. We're going to be able to provide better care, and we're going to be happier about it if we're working together, if we identify the problems together and we collaborate on the solutions. So when we work and meet with the healthcare leaders, oftentimes the first thing we ask them in a meeting is, what are your priorities? How can we help you meet those priorities? ER doctors are problem solvers. We kind of like looking for issues that have to be fixed. And oftentimes we don't get bogged down in the details, and we can sometimes, we can kind of see through the forest pretty well. Mm-hmm. And I think the hospitals appreciate that. But it's not just lip service. It's really rolling up our sleeves and doing the hard work there. And it's also what we were mentioning earlier, promoting involvement with hospital committees, chiefs of staff, really trying to become the nerd or the nerve center of the hospital. And really just trying to be working within all the complicated environments within the hospital and letting people know that we are supporting them and bringing value. Anyways, those principles have really taken us very far. And I like to think the healthcare leaders think of us as good partners.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've mentioned that with almost every single doc, even the ones that you have recently brought into the group when you acquire another emergency department, they're all involved, it sounds like. Can you think of any examples of kind of seeing a result of that investment or where it flowed back your direction?
Well, most of the growth opportunities that we've had have been based upon performance and the reputation that comes from that. So one of our first opportunities for growth was at another hospital in the system that was having some struggles. And they were struggling with retention. They were struggling with flow of patients in their department, getting patients into the ER, getting them seen quickly, and getting them out of the ER. And we had been kind of on their front lines of scribe use. And so we were asked to come in as consultants into another hospital within the same healthcare system. This is about 10 years ago. And we came in as consultants, and we tried to essentially kind of integrate a lot of the platform that we used at our home site, including we even brought in scribes. And in a very, very short period of time, we were able to kind of implement this new platform. And it was really, really a sea change for that emergency department. And we were rewarded with the contract to then take over that hospital within a year. So that's one example. Pretty significant example. But what happened from that was that we developed a reputation as problem solvers, and that yielded many, many other opportunities. So just within that same healthcare system, we picked up several other contracts since that time and have really had a very successful relationship with that company.
Super. Yeah. And any other kind of core principles or values that jump out that you lean on? Probably it's part of this platform in a way that you're talking about.
Yeah. So the first one was focus on patient care. Number two is a focus on our relationships within the hospitals and the healthcare systems. And the third one is a focus on ourselves. And this kind of refers back to what we've been talking about earlier. We think that a high quality provider is one that is well rested, that has breadth in their life, that isn't working too hard, and has plenty of support across innumerable different levels in their career. And, I talked about the shift nirvana, for example, those allowing people to work their career at the pace that works for them. It's really, really important, particularly in emergency medicine, but I can really see how you could apply that to any walk of life. But that's why our docs are happy. It's because they're not worked to death. One of the challenges is once you get used to how good things can be, then we tend to undervalue it a little bit and we forget. And one of our challenges within leadership or within the organization overall is we always have to continue to be attentive to new issues as they come up. And we also have to be very progressive, because in the year 2018, everything might look just great, but expectations change and expectations evolve. And so what maybe wasn't even on our radar in 2018 may need to be a priority in 2019. Our society is going through pretty transformational changes and pretty quickly along all sorts of different areas that maybe you didn't normally associate with a small physician group. Diversity, equity, wellness, parental leaves, all these themes are starting to take shape and gaining much more steam than they ever had before. And it's a great thing, but it takes a lot of energy, and it really requires leaders to keep their ears open and to keep their eyes on the horizon, really being willing to be challenged and willing to listen to those challenges and then try to put a lot of structure and foundation around areas where we want to be moving forward.
I love that. I guess that brings us right into the middle of the topic of physician leadership. And I wonder if you could, give us a picture of what your thoughts are about leadership and physician leadership, and why is physician leadership important?
Yeah, it's all I know. I don't have experience. I've never worked as a doctor aside from residency. I've never worked as a physician where a physician wasn't leading the group. But my take is that medicine is its own environment. It's not like a typical business. And if we ran it like a business where you had, you're driven by profit margins and such, then we'd be abandoning our prime directive. And once again, our prime directive is outstanding care. And my philosophy is that physicians as leaders are able to best understand the needs of the patients because we're in the room with them. And I don't want to say that nurses or other members of the healthcare team can't, because I think they also can be very effective leaders. But I think physicians have a unique opportunity to have a really clear understanding of what the needs of the patients are. They also understand really keenly what the life of a physician is like, what the stressors are, what success looks like. And I don't know if somebody coming in with their MBA will understand that success isn't always measured in your 401k and your salary. I think it can be measured in many, many other ways that might be hard from people outside of the physician bubble to understand.
So I take it you don't have an MBA?
No, I don't. No. And I know plenty of physicians who do, and they put it to good use in situations, but I don't know if it's a prerequisite. The business of medicine, at least when you're having a provider group, it's not that complex. And so I don't know if there's tremendous value all the time. There can be, depending on the MBA, what your goals are with an MBA. But from my perch, it doesn't seem to have tremendous value.
So any milestones or turning points for you as a leader, things that you recognized to be important in your leadership journey?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you one observation that I have, and this is not so much about it like a pivot point or a turning point, but I have far less certainty in my life than I used to have. I used to really feel that you could rely on very certain about your core principles or your core beliefs. And I've been in this position for 10 years. So I have 10 years of mistakes to look back upon and 10 years of decisions and pivot points. And I'm less confident in my certainty than I ever have been before. It reminds me of a radiologist I know. He's a great radiologist. And he mentioned to me not too long ago that he feels like he can no longer read a chest x-ray because of everything he knows now. He's just lost all his certainty about what he's seeing.
I love that.
Yeah. And so I think that's, for a leader, I think that's probably a healthy attribute, to always question what you think you know and what you believe. There have been plenty of times where I've come down with a hammer on certain situations, and now looking back, recognizing that I misread a situation, or I misread somebody's intentions, or misread the situation around that person. And I'll continue to do that in the future. It's hard though when you're leading, trying to be out front, and sometimes there's not always a roadmap. And sometimes you don't have a lot of people around you tapping you on the shoulder and willing to tell you that you're making a poor decision or you might be going in the wrong direction. You can set yourself up for those scenarios. So I try to surround myself by people and say, I actively tell people. I told somebody earlier today this actually. I said, I've worked with you a long time. I want you to know if you ever need to tap me on the shoulder and give me some pointers, I'll always welcome it.
That's fantastic. I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is what is coming to mind for me. The worst performers are also poor at assessing their own capabilities. So there's this kind of inverse correlation where the worst performers are likely to overestimate their abilities, and the experts, like your fantastic radiologist who just throws up his hands and say, I don't think I can read an x-ray, a chest x-ray anymore. Somebody who's got an enormous amount of expertise has seen it all and understands how fragile our intellect can be and how important it is to keep an open mind.
Yeah, you hear political leaders being criticized because they waffle. And to think that would be a negative attribute, I look at that as, oh, that's somebody who can, weigh a problem and isn't afraid to contemplate other ideas and not be so certain. Abe Lincoln, I think, was a good example of that. To have a leader who's just so certain that they're right, so certain that they're on the right pathway and never looking to the left or the right, I think that's a problem.
It's just too bad that humans somehow can at times prefer that authoritarian nature. They can choose that nature of somebody that will act overly confident despite lack of substance there, I guess.
It's comfortable. It's comfortable to know that you have somebody who you believe is competent and is going to call the shots and make everything okay for you. It's comfortable. And I think it's probably discomforting. I'm sure I make a lot of people in our group uncomfortable when I come back and I say, I'm rethinking something. I think maybe we should take a different approach here. That may make certain people uncomfortable.
But it's like research, right? It's new information. Heaven forbid, if we were still slapping leeches on people, we've got new information. You have talked about the big changes, the crises with the coronavirus pandemic and the hospital that closed. And we haven't talked about this yet, but the George Floyd murder was just down the street from your hospital, one of the hospitals that you're in. And I wonder if you could address, like with COVID, what would you say has been the impact? I don't know if there's a kind of a nutshell kind of response to these huge questions, but I wanted to just touch on each of these big crises.
Yeah. Well, starting with COVID, first of all, it's been a real honor to be, in many cases, on the front lines of the pandemic. I remember just about a year ago when we saw the train coming and it hadn't arrived yet. We were freaked out. We didn't really know what to expect, but what we did expect was we thought we were going to see 50% or higher increase in volumes. We thought our doctors were going to be dropping like flies. I was reaching out to other ER groups and leaders trying to put together a coalition. Like, we'll help you if 10 of your docs go out, call us up and we'll try to get people credentialed and working for you. And you'll do the same thing for us. And quickly, what we realized is the opposite was happening. We were seeing a massive drop in volumes, and we were sitting on our hands in the ERs. We were still seeing plenty of COVID patients, but the rest of the population stopped coming to the ER. They were afraid to come, and that's still happening, and not as much as it was. We were also facing legitimate shortages in PPE. We were facing a lot of unknowns about how to care for the disease process. We were intubating people a lot earlier. People were coming in severely hypoxic, and we were quickly putting them on ventilators before the intensivist community helped us understand that they actually do better when we have permissive hypoxia and keep them off the ventilators. So there was all sorts of uncertainty, and it was just a rapidly changing world. We were pretty adaptive, or we were adaptive as much as we could. We would have weekly Zoom meetings where we'd bring our entire group together, and we were just talking. It was just dialogue, talking all the time, constantly tweaking things and constantly implementing something and then taking it away. For a while, we thought we were going to shift to 100% telehealth coverage, thinking that we have to keep doctors out of the room with patients. Fortunately, what we learned was that PPE was very effective, and we were very successful at keeping ourselves healthy. And they gave us a lot more confidence just to be on the front lines. when George Floyd was killed in May, that was here in Minneapolis, and civil unrest broke out across the community. And my hospital that I work at, Abbott Northwestern, that was right down the street. And literally on the same block as the hospital, there are burned out building after burned out building. And so we were really at ground zero. And that was very, very challenging time for our community. I think the community was really, really intent on supporting reform in policing, but we were also grappling with, the destruction of our city and kind of how do you reconcile those two forces? And we also faced we had to challenge ourselves personally about how we address this. We have our docs some people live out in the sticks, some people live in the suburbs, some people live in the city. And a lot of us were, kind of afraid to drive in and out of the hospital at all hours of the night. But we are also at the same time taking care of patients who live in that community. And so we wanted to be there for them and also, not try to kind of impose these double standards where we get to, jet out to our safe haven and just kind of come in just for our shifts. So it really brought social responsibility and topics of diversity and equity into sharp focus for us. And it's challenged us to do better and also shed a lot of light on the fact that we weren't as diverse as we should be, and we're lagging behind, and we can do better. We still have a long ways to go, but I think this has given us an opportunity to try to do better in the future. The other big crisis that we have right now is the closure of a hospital, and that's a whole other set of things that we have to deal with and reconcile. Ask me in a year how we come out of that one. We're not quite sure.
I will. So I think I recognize that you are absolutely in midstream with these three crises, really. I would love to have an opportunity to follow up with you in a year and just see what has happened, what kinds of decisions have been made by you and your partners, and where ECC is at. I have really abused you time-wise here, Topher, but I've loved this conversation. I so appreciate the opportunity to dive into this with you. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I've been so curious about what kind of organizational culture you've created there. So many of the elements should be promulgated, I think, to other organizations. Anything that you would like to say in closing?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. None of what we've accomplished is original thought by me. The model that we have, I really lay credit to the founders of our organization, and this is a very much a team effort. And so I'm the beneficiary and oftentimes the spokesperson for it. To do this, you need buy-in, you need an entire team, an entire organization to be at the front lines of that. So I really just want to give a shout out to all my partners and everybody within my organization for all the hard work they do. They make it easy for me. And secondly, it's great to talk about all of our accolades and everything we do well. There are plenty of things we don't do well. And just like every organization, we can do better. As we look forward into the future, that's our biggest challenge, is never being content with what you're doing right now. Always trying to push, and try to do better.
Yeah, resting on those laurels. So if any listeners wanted to find you, reach out to you, or contact you, where might they find more information about you?
We have a website. It's www.eccemergency.com.
Topher, thank you so much. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you. This has been just what I had hoped for.
Thank you, Patty. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I want to applaud you for all your great work. You're shining light on some really interesting topics.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the License to Lead podcast. Be sure to visit licensed2leadpodcast.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter. Leave us a message with your provocative question or your thoughtful comments. You might inspire a future episode of the License to Lead podcast. Thanks so much, everyone.